A very warm welcome to our distinguished speakers, the business school, faculty, students, administrators, and guests who are here with us today. We're delighted to have you with us and thank you for taking time out of your schedule today to join us for the teach-in session on the impact of the Ukraine-Russia war on business. My name is Geeta Suri, and I'm a professor of management in the business school at Adelphi. A few of us, namely Professors Pam Buckle, Harvey Heinowitz, and I were in a breakout room discussing the topic after spring break at last month's faculty meeting, and following in the footsteps of Professor Katie Laatakainen from the College of Arts and Sciences, we decided to have a teach-in on the impact of the Ukraine-Russia war on business. So a huge thank you to the whole team at Adelphi for making this possible. Before we begin, I'd like to give you the agenda for the session and make a few housekeeping announcements. We'll begin with some brief remarks by Associate Dean, Dr. Alan Cooper. Dr. Alan Cooper will introduce our panelists, and he will be the moderator for the session. After the panel discussion, there will be a Q&A session with the audience, moderated by Tiger Shui, graduate assistant in the School of Business. Please write your questions in the chat area, and we will take them up one by one if you are online. For those who are going to ask questions from in person, Professors Raghida Abdallah Yassine and Pam Buckle will be handling that. The wrap-up will be done by Dr. Alan Cooper and the vote of thanks by me. Please keep your microphone on mute unless you're speaking. And if you have any questions during the panel, we'd like you to please type in the questions in the chat, and the questions will be logged and we'll address them at the end of the discussion during the Q&A session. Same for those who are in person, please just hold your questions until we can get to them. Following the Q&A session, that will be actually the end of the conversation, the end of the session. Thank you so much. We can begin now. Dr. Alan Cooper, Associate Dean of the Business School, over to you.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. First of all, I'd like to thank Geeta Suri and the panelists and Tiger for putting this all together. It's a great opportunity for the School of Business to discuss the horrific war that's going on in the Ukraine and how it can affect business here in the United States and all over the world. But again, I want to thank the panelists. This was put together, fairly quickly. On behalf of the School of Business and Interim Dean Marian Highland, I'd like to welcome everybody and thank you all for coming to our teach-in. Without further ado, what I will do is introduce one speaker at a time. I will have them speak, and then we can take a question or two after. Then I will introduce the next speaker and so forth and so on. And then at the end, again, as Professor Suri said, we will have questions and answers from the group. So I'm going to first introduce Pamela Buckle. Pamela Buckle is a professor in the Willumstad School of Business, specializing in organizational behavior. She researches psychological aspects of organizational life with colleagues in the European School of Governance and the International Federation of Systems Research. Without further ado, Professor Buckle.
We're setting up our slides. Slides on. All right, share the screen one more time. All right, I picked, which one did I pick? There we go. Technology. There you go. All right. Am I audible to people at home? All right, I think so. Thank you for having me participate in this event. My undergraduate degree was in Russian history, and it's been a while since I had an opportunity to think in that territory again. But since then, I've got an MBA and a PhD in organizational behavior. And a part of organizational behavior is for us to think about the behavior of leaders. So today, I'm going to speak about Volodymyr Zelensky, president of the Ukraine. In particular, how we can understand this man in terms of the theory that we call transformational leadership. So who is this odd, short man? 8 years younger than me, Zelensky grew up in a Russian-speaking family, Jewish parents. His dad was a computer science professor, his mother an engineer. And he got a law degree, but ever since he was 17 years old, he found it a lot of fun working as a stand-up comic. That's the career that moved him into acting. He went on to act in movies and TV, mostly romantic comedies, and to win Dancing with the Stars. There we go. So we now have a president of this country who, up to recently, one of his best claims to fame was that he had won Dancing with the Stars. Now, contrast that fairly lighthearted picture with that of the Ukraine. What we know about the people of the Ukraine for centuries is that the country has been through a lot. People from this country tend to be somewhat mistrustful of politicians, tend to be rather cynical toward politicians. Before this invasion, this was a very deeply divided country. 5 main ethnic groups, only 2/3 of the population even speaks Ukrainian, their official national language. Before the election, Zelensky was not considered a particularly great leader. Today, his popularity among Ukrainians stands at 91%. So there must be some pretty remarkable things that this person is doing. Of the 193 countries, so for a popularity level to go from pretty mediocre to 91%, there must be some pretty interesting things, powerful things that a leader is doing to get there. Up to this point in time, we know that of the 193 countries in the world right now, 64 of them have donated billions of dollars and billions of euros to support the Ukrainian war effort. Companies like Microsoft and SpaceX are donating their cybersecurity expertise to this country. Airbnb is donating lodging for refugees. Amazon is donating logistics expertise. Philip Morris has donated 500,000 packs of cigarettes for Ukrainian soldiers. International alliances that have been non-existent or sluggish for decades are behaving radically differently now. The 30 member countries of NATO are operating by consensus, unanimous agreement. Now, when was the last time you saw 30 people agree on anything when the stakes were high? So professors like me want to know what's going on. How is it that some leaders enable groups of people to accomplish things that no one would have thought possible? So, to think about this more clearly, I'm going to think in terms of a theory we call transformational leadership, which has 4 parts: intellectual stimulation, inspirational motivation, individualized consideration, and idealized influence. I'll start at the top. Transformational leaders make people think. They inspire thinking, they stimulate thinking. And they do that because they challenge the status quo. For example, Zelensky's political campaign avoided debates and talk shows altogether. Instead, his campaign rallies were sort of impromptu comedy shows, and he communicated straight to voters through social media. We have become familiar to this impromptu selfie-style speeches that Zelensky started recording each day, really since the first day of the invasion. This is clearly not your typical Ukrainian statesman. Transformational leaders stimulate people's confidence to be innovative, to be problem solvers, to improvise. We see here two pictures. We see citizens of the city of Kyiv collecting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bottles that they learned how to construct into Molotov cocktails to use when anticipated Russian troops moved into the country. The other picture at the top, I love this picture. This is a woman who is a member of the Ukrainian parliament. She, if you see, has an impeccable manicure. This is a woman who is teaching herself how to use a rifle. So she can become see herself not just as a member of parliament for that country, but as a soldier for that country. A very interesting thought shift. This is important because in a complex situation, the leader can't be the central source of guidance. Anytime you're in a fast-shifting situation with a fast-shifting adversary, you're operating on what we call the edge of chaos. And transformational leaders promote followers that think things out on their own and take pragmatic action. Next, inspirational motivation. The vision of a transformational leader can't just be intellectually stimulating, but it has to be emotionally powerful. A quote that I heard yesterday on CNN. Zelensky said, "I believe the way we fight for freedom is the most important message. You can send a lot of messages with words, but only a few act on their words. I believe the way our people act today is a signal to the whole world." Imagine being told that. Imagine starting your day today being told that whatever you are doing is a signal to the whole world. It's elevating, right? Inspiration does take words, and transformational leaders know how to use them well. Now, people in different countries use language differently. For instance, none of my students ever leave class saying, "Glory to organizational behavior." But the news is full of Zelensky speeches with him ending by saying, "Glory to Ukraine." We should also think of inspiration in terms of the kind of inspiration that comes with self-sacrifice. Military history is filled with examples of transformational leaders who will not send subordinates into a risky situation where they would not themselves go. Many of us remember to the US offer to get Zelensky out of Kyiv when the first attack happened. He thumbed his nose. He said, "I need ammunition, not a ride." And we see here a picture of a leader really tightly bound with his people. We see him not just communicating a vision for others, but living it himself. Next part of transformational leadership is individualized consideration. Zelensky has this sort of easy camaraderie with other people. We see him in a presidential role, but there's also sort of a human-to-human connection. He said, "When at certain moments I think that all of this is dangerous for me, I understand that all the rest of us are going through this as well. What people are feeling like who are hiding in basements, what our soldiers are feeling like right now." He has this capacity to empathize, to think about what other people are experiencing. And he says this poignantly. In a speech to the US Congress last month, he said, "I am 45 years old, but today my age stopped when the hearts of more than 100 children stopped beating. I understand that the death count, the known death count of children right now in the Ukraine is somewhere around 200 people." Finally, last piece of transformational leadership I'll speak of is idealized influence. People want to emulate transformational leaders. And if you can't be a president whose country is under attack, you can go for a visit. So far, 8 world leaders have come to talk and be photographed with Zelensky in Kiev while the attack on Kiev was active. Although Boris Johnson, I think, left, he came once the attack in Kiev had passed. But quite extraordinary that people so wanted to be in this person's presence that they would take that kind of personal risk. He has been invited in pictures here to speak to a number of governments. Pictures here, him speaking to the US Congress, to the Parliament of the country of Canada, to the UN Security Council. And it's impressive that he's being invited to be a part of so many governmental environments, given his consistent, disciplined message of criticism that the West is not doing enough to help his country survive his war. Even despite that criticism, he has, people hold him as an ideal of leadership. So a few parting thoughts. This today is day 54 of the expected 4-day invasion of the country of Ukraine. It isn't supposed to be happening like this. We're having to reconsider military predictions that a state 28 times larger than Ukraine invaded 54 years ago. And as of today, the Ukraine still exists as a sovereign state on the map. And we professors have to reconsider the leadership research. Transformational theory is an American theory developed in the US that doesn't necessarily generalize well to other countries. A study published just in 2019 said that transformational leadership probably not all that effective in Europe. Clearly, there's a lot that we don't know. But what we can know is that right now, a Ukrainian leader and his followers are transforming each other in a very complex environment. This country is going to become something different, and so will they. But one final caveat. Transformational leadership is a good framework to help us understand how leaders operate. But transformational leaders can be constructive or destructive. You could just as readily discuss the transformational leadership attributes of Vladimir Putin. But for now, I'll pass the floor back to Dean Cooper.
Thank you very much, Pam. Does anybody have a question or two that we want to start with now, or otherwise we can go on to the next speaker and save all the questions until the end? Anybody there? I don't see anything. All right, so why don't we continue? Our next speaker is Raghida Abdallah Yassine. Raghida Abdallah Yassine is an assistant professor of human resources and management at Adelphi University and received her doctorate from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She has practical experience in the healthcare field from her work as an employee performance manager and has more than 6 years of teaching experience. An important goal of her research is to contribute to the knowledge set of HRM as well as HRD and to provide suggestions to organizations on how to design and implement effective HRM practices to gain competitive and sustainable advantages. Raghida, why don't we try without the microphone first to see if that helps. If not, then we'll signal you to speak directly into the microphone.
So hello everybody. When Raghida asked me to
Microphone.
Yeah, if we can, I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah, it's better probably if you speak right into the microphone. I apologize.
It's okay. Is that better?
Much better, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So when Pam asked me if I wanted to join this panel, I thought this was a very exciting opportunity. They started asking me, so HR, how is HR interested in terms of war in Ukraine? But well, you know, it's what companies do during these times that really reflect what is important. And I can just go on and just continue from what Pam stated. When she was talking about Zelensky and he said, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. It's an act. And he's saying, I'm staying here and I'm staying here with my people and I'm here for you. And I want you to know that I know what you're going through. And these are what's important when we're talking about from an HR perspective, what can organizations do in terms of that war in Ukraine? So I'm pretty sure, and this is a question that most of you have heard maybe before, but how many of you know someone who has been impacted by the war? I have Pam sitting right next to me, right? There's a lot of students also who have been impacted by the war, and not just students, there's also a lot of professors. We even have some professors in our department who have been affected by this war. How are you feeling? How are they feeling? How are you feeling about that? These are all things that we need to ask ourselves, because it's very important to understand how we feel to be able to understand how others feel. And that's where businesses can start, and they can start looking into how can we help our employees. Does HR play a key role in helping employees navigate through this crisis? I think they do, and I think they play a very big role. Let's see. How can we address the impact of the war? One thing is you need to know that even if your company doesn't really operate in Ukraine, we are still impacted by the war. You can see it from inflation, you can see it from conversations that they're having maybe in the workplace, some conflicts that have been arising, and especially for those who are actually in Ukraine. How is that conflict affecting them? I mean, sometimes they're unable to get to work, they're unable to buy bread. I mean, and sometimes they're unable to get their money from banks. So how can you address that? And that is where companies can start saying, this is what we can do for you. This is how we can help you. And this is the plan moving forward. And then if we come to really think about it, this comes at the end of a global pandemic. Organizations, employees, managers, everybody's exhausted already. On top of that comes this war. And what did we learn from the pandemic? One thing that came out of that pandemic is emotional health took a big hit from everybody, not just one person in particular. And that is something that we can learn from the pandemic and say, well, us as organizations, we need to address that. We cannot leave that, because whoever is affected by that war, even if they're not physically there, they are feeling something. They are going through something. What can we do to assist those employees? And we need to remember, as organizations, in the times that we are functioning right now, employees have a choice of where to go. How many of you have heard of that big resignation? They're leaving, yeah. They're leaving because they have a choice of where they want to go. You don't want to give us remote work? Oh, we find a lot of other companies that are giving us remote work, right? But there's one thing that employees will always remember is, what did you do for them, right? So what we can start with is creating resilient employees, those who are easily can adapt to change, and those who can face crisis and come up at the top and not at the bottom. And just like Maya Angelou said once, and this is something that I really like here, people may not remember what you said, but they remember the way you made them feel. So whenever you see Zelensky speaking, either to Congress or on TV or anywhere else, how does he make you feel? He makes me feel like, wow, what a God. That is such an inspirational leader, right? He's transformational. And he makes me think, he has guts. And if he's staying there, I want to stay there with him too. That's the same goes for companies. It's what you do for me, I will do for you. Okay? Sorry. Okay, so what can organizations really do? There are a couple of steps that they can do. They actually can ensure safety and security of employees. So if they're an organization that has headquarters in Ukraine and they have employees there, they need to make sure that these employees are able to get their basic necessities. They need to make sure that they are arriving to work safely, or have alternative ways for them to work in safe and healthy working environments. Okay, and also in terms of getting their money, because there is an issue with banks right now in Ukraine. So even if you want to pay them their money, they can't go to the bank and get their money. So you have to think of all that. And then when you talk about having open communication and dialogue, this is really important. A lot of employees, a lot of people, not just employees, are questioning. So why is all this reaction to Ukraine and not to somewhere else, like Palestine or Yemen or other places? So people are questioning that. It's okay to have those open communication and dialogue. Make it a norm where we communicate and we try to understand each other's perspectives. That's what's important. And we need to create a culture of support. Support in terms of creating employee assistance programs where if someone is really in need and in terms of mental health, things like that, they are available. We want to support our employees. And if all of a sudden that one employee who's really affected by someone who actually lives in Ukraine, give them that time off to actually check on these people, give them private areas where they can actually call overseas, etc., to check on their relatives, maybe colleagues that they've had previous relationships with, etc., right? And be prepared to diffuse conflict. And I'm just going to take again the example of what happened during the pandemic. People started saying China virus. We started seeing hate towards Asians. And a lot of bullying that started happening in the workplace, and not just in the workplace, in universities and everywhere else because of that. And that also is happening in the workplace, especially when you're saying, I'm from Russia, oh, you're from Russia, and then they start saying things to them, right? But we need to make sure that we properly address DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. We're a diverse population. Look at New York. Just go down the street and you'll have 5 people from 5 different places, from 5 different cultures, from 5 different languages. And this is what we are. And organizations are exactly the same. We have to teach our employees how we accept each other, accept our differences, and try to work together collaboratively to come up with safe and healthy work environments and reduce the hostile work environment. We need to offer flexible working hours and also let employees know you are supporting Ukraine, that's okay, right? And also give them the chance to be able to help if they need to help, okay? So all this brings me back, and again, I'm gonna go back to Zelensky, and I think one thing that he does have is a high emotional intelligence. He understands his feelings, he understands the feelings of others, and especially go back to the quote that Pam used, where he said about the 100 children, that his heart stopped beating when the 100 children's hearts stopped beating. So he's just saying that I understand it. And that's what that emotional intelligence is. If you are high on emotional intelligence, you can recognize and understand emotions in yourself and your ability to use this awareness to manage your behavior and relationships. That is something that he's really good at. That is something what leaders and managers in organizations should be good at, because it helps you understand others, especially if you put yourself in their place. And when you do that, then you're trying to come up with those good policies that we talked about, and trying to understand others, to understand yourself, to be able to understand others better. Experience is not what happens to you, it's how you interpret what happens to you, okay? So just remember that, and remember, people always remember what you do for them, not how you just say, like, oh, let's help you, and then you don't do anything, right? That's part of emotional intelligence, and that's the empathy. And it's not saying, I'm sorry, and just end it at that, but I'm sorry, but how can I help? Can we do X, Y, and Z? That's empathy. That's what we all need to have. And with that, I'll go back to Dean Cooper, Associate Dean Cooper.
Thank you very much, Raghida. Does anybody have a specific question for Raghida? Or again, if you'd like to save it until the end, we're fine with that as well. Pam does. I see a hand up.
here's my question, a comment actually. So I'm on the board of directors for an international organization, and many of us were saying when the war broke out that we wanted our leader to make a comment, some sort of statement about it. And he refused to, because he said, we have some members from Russia. We don't want to say anything because we don't want them to feel alienated. So the effect is the entire organization feels alienated because it's a verboten subject, you know. So I think what you were saying in terms of the importance of open communication made me realize that sometimes failing to take an opportunity to find a way to make a statement can actually add to mistrust in an organization. I don't know if that bears out your experience, if it's something observed.
No, it's true, because even, and again, I said, if you just don't talk about it, others are going to misinterpret that no communication about the issue. But rather, when you talk about it and have constructive dialogue, that's what's important, the constructive part. And when you do that, even if you have the Russians that you're saying, they will actually have voice in that dialogue. And that's what's important, because we need to be mature enough to listen to each other, right? Listen with constructive dialogue. That's what's important.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions before we move on? Nope. Okay. So our next speaker is Robert Goldberg. Professor Goldberg is currently the James F. Bender Clinical Professor of Finance at Adelphi University, where he teaches courses in finance and oversees the Adelphi Student Investment Fund. Robert also is a manager with Marathon Partners, a financial advisory firm, and consults with various institutional clients. From 2002 to 2003, he was a managing director at Barclays Capital, where he ran their U.S. corporate finance group. Previously, Professor Goldberg co-founded and co-headed the debt business for W.R. Hambrecht from 1999 to 2002. From 1983 to 1999, Robert worked at Merrill Lynch, where he held a number of positions, including managing director and head of investment grade origination and chairman of the equity committee commitment. He has a BS and MS in nuclear engineering and an MBA in finance, all from Columbia University. Professor Goldberg.
Thank you, Alan. Today, I'd like to spend a few minutes on the conflict's direct impact on our economy and finances. So now I will attempt to share some slides. Sorry. Perfect. For those of us of a certain age, Alan, you might be there, I'm not sure others, there are some echoes from the 1970s. Back in the 60s and 70s, the US ran some fairly large deficits as it funded both the Vietnam War and growth in non-defense spending. People remember Johnson's Great Society. Shortly towards the end of that period, we had two large supply shocks on the oil side, two large oil shocks, 1973, 1979. They both sharply curtailed energy supply due to geopolitical events in the Middle East. Some of you will also remember waiting on gas lines. The combination of those two factors, among some others, led to many years of fairly high inflation and very high interest rates. We now have another supply-demand imbalance as excessive spending couples with back-to-back supply shocks from the pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We've got shortages in fuel, food, raw materials, manufactured goods, and services. Again, some similarities back to the 70s. As everyone knows, inflation has returned, and it's returned with a vengeance as more dollars are chasing less goods and services. Inflation at the last reading was just under 9%. The Federal Reserve and many government officials, or most government officials, were saying for the past year plus that inflation is transitory. It was going to come back down rapidly as we moved out of the pandemic. That clearly did not happen, and the conflict in the Ukraine has just worsened the situation. To take a look at one of the drivers of this inflation, you don't need to look much further than total federal spending, which has grown by over $5 trillion since 2020. In the 2018-2019 period, federal budgets spent about $4+ trillion a year. Between 2020, 2021, 2022, the budgets ranged anywhere from $6 to $7 trillion a year. So if you look at how much has been added to spending since 2019, it's well over $5 trillion. That spending was not paid for by taxes. That means the government needed to borrow the money, and it did. And it ballooned federal debt, which had been in the order of magnitude of $20 trillion prior to the pandemic, and is now approaching, or some would say slightly over $30 trillion. So again, all this excess spending, rate of spending than prior to both the pandemic and what's happening in Ukraine, has gone all through government borrowing. Now, and this is important, the borrowing did not come from those who had money or from countries looking to lend to the US. It did not come from people's savings. It did not come from foreign savings. Instead, it came from the Federal Reserve. What does this mean? The Federal Reserve, as you know, is US's central bank, effectively monetized the excess spending, all this deficit spending, this increase in debt. They do that by indirectly buying the newly issued treasury bonds from the US government and paying for them effectively with cash, printed money. They just create it. So the Fed creates dollars, which are used to buy the new debt, which go to the Treasury, which comes back out to us, increasing money supply. That money supply is increased from roughly $15 trillion 2019 time period to over $20 trillion today. Again, this is all the excess money chasing fewer goods. It'd be one thing if we had an increase in supply. We've got two opposed forces. We have an increased amount of money chasing a decreased amount of goods and services. The Fed is now playing catch up. For years, they said inflation would be transitory, and they've kept a very, very low interest rate policy in effect, basically back to since the financial crisis. And now they're moving to correct that mistake. Interest rates have started to move up at the Federal Reserve level, and those are starting to transmit through the larger financial system. Mortgage rates, which have been down around 3% just a few months ago, are now touching 5%. That is going to crimp household budgets, as it's not just mortgage rates, it will be car loan rates, lease rates, consumer finance rates, student loan rates. All rates are going up. That's going to just continue to crimp and squeeze household budgets. Importantly, it's not just the household budgets that are going to get squeezed. The government, as we just saw, is borrowing a significant amount of money. And unlike most families that borrow their mortgages on a long-term basis, a significant amount of federal borrowing is on a short-term basis, an adjustable rate basis. And as those rates go up, interest expense for the government is going to go up. So it's now roughly $1 trillion a year. Those numbers are going to go up significantly, and that is going to squeeze the government's budget in the same way that higher mortgage rates are going to squeeze the household budget. At the same time, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine has been a wake-up call to the US and other Western countries who had not been spending as much on defense as some might have thought more prudent. Spending for defense has been for the last 10 years in the area of 3+% of GDP, a far lower number than in prior decades. And it's reasonable to expect that defense spending is going to increase from here. So you're going to have more money being spent on defense, more money being spent on interest expense, and those two together are going to further squeeze the budget. This leads us with a few realities in the short term. As many of you know, Russia produces 11% of the world's oil and only consumes 4%. They were a net exporter, provider of world oil. The same with natural gas, 17% while consuming 11%. Equally important with food, just as an example, they produce 10% of the global wheat supply while consuming only 6%. Ukraine also is a large producer of oil, natural gas, and food product. And while the West is not embargoing or stopping the purchase of Ukrainian oil, gas, and food, the blows to their infrastructure can only have a negative effect on their ability to produce. The effect on these shortages in oil and natural gas go way beyond the rise in car prices or gas heat for the home. Oil and gas are used in many, many other products and throughout the economy. They're used in the production of plastics, fertilizer, synthetic clothing, and even asphalt. Over the intermediate term, the picture's not that much prettier. There are many who believe that we should be shifting dramatically to non-hydrocarbon sources of energy, focusing more on solar and wind and battery storage and other electronics. The problem is that we also are going to face significant supply issues there. China produces over 50% of rare earth metals used in electronics, while the US only produces 15%. The US has very little domestic rare earth finished production because of concerns about the pollution effects of finishing off rare earth minerals that have been mined. And the US imports 80% from China. The US produces 1% of global solar panels versus 67% for China. And the US imports over 80% of solar panel needs. My conclusion is that we face some challenging times. The government is going to need to increase spending on defense while reining in other spending. Taxes are going to have to go up for everybody. We're going to need a more thoughtful energy policy, balancing the reality of continued need for fossil fuels for at least the foreseeable future, while moving more smartly toward renewables. And critical supply resilience is going to replace efficiency as a main focus for industry. Alan, back to you.
Thank you, Robert. That was excellent. Any questions specifically for Professor Goldberg, again, or we will continue and then save the questions for the end? There's actually a question in the chat. Actually, let's answer this one now. It seems pertinent. So the question is more money spending on defense good for the United States economy? Follow up, would defense spending or social programs be better, including renewable energy resources?
Well, the problem with spending more on defense, actually, we should take the second part first. Which is better, defense spending or social programs better? Well, first you need to, you need to maintain your political system, your country, your borders. So, the first rule is protect the country. So therefore, probably first spend your first dollar on defense. And once you are secure, then you spend discretionary dollars on social programs. I don't think it's that, we really get to choose. We have to decide, and there are people who, spend their careers figuring out what's best from a defense perspective. So it's hard for me to say whether we should be spending more on social spending versus on defense. I'd first say you do what's necessary to secure your country, and then you continue to spend on social needs after that. Is that money good spending for the economy? I don't think there's good or bad. You want to have a safe society. And if that requires more spending on defense, then that's something that the country decides to do. All spending ultimately produces goods and services that people, want. And if they don't want them, they don't spend on that. Was there any positive effect of the many years of low interest rates? I think actually it had a quite distortionary effect on the economy, with people and businesses making choices that probably were not the correct choices. You need proper levels of interest rates in order to provide signals to investors as to, what are the right risk-adjusted returns and projects to take on. And the central bank for many years has distorted that process by keeping rates too low. That has caused a boom in financial asset values, which has certainly helped those who have assets. I don't think it necessarily has helped the rest of the country.
Thank you. All right, continuing with our next speaker. Sotir Shadev is the president of the Oyster Bridge Group, a supply chain and business strategy organization, and also the president of the Association of Supply Chain Management, New York City, Long Island Forum, a nonprofit organization serving members and students. He's also one of our adjunct professors here at the Willumstad School of Business, as well as other colleges. You're up.
Thank you, everybody. I am the last act, so, it's like, the bottom of the seventh, Alan, but we still have to carry the game, right? It is great to talk about things, but before we talk about things, we have to put things in perspective and reframe some of the things that were discussed. Where is Ukraine located? I give a lesson to my class about, can you draw the outline of the United States of America? And 95% of the students fail. What does that mean is that our geographic learning and our historic learning is very poor. And that's why history repeats itself over and over again. This war, before we talked the war, it said, that the seeds of war are sown in the times of peace. And that's exactly what is happening. The world expected only economic wars, being played out, that nobody really wants to fight. If you can squeeze somebody economically, that was good enough. And that was a promise of globalization in a way, wealth transfer, however you want to call it. But this war has certainly changed the dynamics again, reset the, sort of the hegemony in the world, and also talking about where the world will go on from here. This war is not about Russia. This war is about Ukraine. And where does Ukraine fit into the scheme of things is two other countries are watching this very closely, and that is China and Taiwan. Because China, in as much as it wants to shake hands with Russia, also knows that if it does this playbook one more time with Taiwan, how will this play out for itself? And the other thing is, this war is not about product. This war is all about commodity. I haven't seen any product made in Russia. If anybody has seen it, let me know. Nobody wants to drive in their plane, in the car, and or fly in their planes there. Everybody's scared of them. If you say made in China, then I understand that. This war would be very different. So this war is all about commodity. And Ukraine also is a war about commodity, and that's what's happening. Robert was talking about, how much the trouble is in our country in inflation and the spending we have done and what Russia provides people. But Ukraine does provide 30% of wheat also to Europe. Ukraine also provides few things that nobody even knows about. And one of them is called wiring for airplane parts, aerospace. And many of the companies in the European landscape are having to scale back the production of aircraft because that wiring is now missing. So what does that mean? Because I come from the supply chain area, but certainly I can tell you, supply chain is the business. This word supply chain has become now cocktail talk, but supply chains have always been there, whether it was the Silk Route or the spice route, and countries and people were always trying to sort of, capture that, whoever controlled the route control the economies of countries, right? So where are we now today? I would like to think about it as a ruble rubble, because yeah, ruble has come back a little bit, and Robert probably follows this much more than I do. But the currency needs something behind it. They do have reserves, $680 billion worth. They have gold, they have diamonds. Yes, they do. But what does Ukraine have? Ukraine has a very, very strategic location. If you look geographically, right next to it is Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, you got Romania. Those countries 20, 30 years back were communist in many parts of this world. I don't think want to go back to Russian times, right? No matter what Russia wants to do. So they have interest in protecting their borders. With 2 million plus refugees moving, they know in the end, a lot of trouble will arise at their doorstep, whether they like it or not. That means what? Not only people carry their problems, people carry their social issues, cultural issues. People carry disease sometimes because they're tied up in camps. How will this translate into the future of these countries is very much a challenge now, right? These countries' economies were based a lot on tourism. That tourism is going to get impacted now. So there is this big world of businesses. Microsoft may not get much impacted overall. Google may not get much impacted overall, but a mom and pop store in the neighborhood will get impacted. Smaller businesses will get a much higher impact of this than bigger businesses, because bigger businesses can move production from one country to the other country. But smaller businesses, midstream businesses, they have nowhere to go. They do not have money and time invested to find new suppliers. They don't even travel to many countries, but they buy product from them. And that supply chain route is going to get disrupted for years to come now. And if it does not get disrupted, it will have a higher tax revenue on it. Countries are going to start to put quotas, try to go back to the old days where they will try to control their economies. And it's almost like a vicious cycle now developing, where one thing is going to unravel into something else now. So where does this solutions lie? Because I always look for solutions in problems. We can talk about problems, but before that, I know Robert was giving some great numbers, but this is about 20 to 30% of revenue for Russia, these commodities. They don't make anything. They sell a commodity. And they have not been as strong as China in going around the world and capturing minerals. China is all over South America. China is all over Africa, trying to catch these rare minerals. Russia has not been strong in that. So they have a much weaker issue here than people realize. Yes, they want to wear the war more for political reasons than for financial gain. And they don't want to lose face, right? That's all dictators try to do. But this war will come to an end. So once it started, it's already coming to an end in many ways. Either they capture areas or they get killed. One or the other is going to happen. So where do we lead us with the businesses? Also remember that people in Africa are suffering because of this war, because they used to get aid from many parts of the world, and that aid is now shifting to Europe. They get raw materials from these parts of the world. They are going to have problems in Ethiopia, Uganda, all these places, Congo. They will not get the wheat that they were getting before. There's already starvation in many parts of the world there. They are going to suffer. Now, how is Russia circumventing part of this? Because everybody says sanctions, and sanctions look great politically. Russia's still sending out stuff which they don't have to say it and can hide it. What does that mean? Fish is being transported from Russia to many parts of the world, but it goes through China, and they process that fish, put it into freezer boxes, and now because they've done some transformation to it, they don't have to say made in Russia anymore, because that transformation process is going to say made in China. So that's the same process. Diamonds are going to India for finishing. Russia does not finish diamonds. They are going to part of India for the longest number of years. India has been the finishing center for diamonds. Once India finishes those diamonds and brings it into Antwerp in Germany, they do not have to say made in Russia anymore. So there are routes that will be taken by businesses try to survive in this whole sort of scenario. So what do businesses do? And I can keep going on. I got a list of stuff that we can talk about. Fertilizer is another problem right now. Yeah, you want to grow something, but you need fertilizer. Businesses have to become companions now to each other. I call it cooperative supply chains now, where if you don't have anything, you're going to talk to your neighbor to get something from them. It's almost like, think of a restaurant. If your restaurant is very busy, but another restaurant in the neighborhood is empty and they want the revenue, if I can make partnership with a restaurant locally, I can say, okay, why don't you send me your extra customers? So both of us can satisfy customer service and also create revenue for the customer and for the business, right? So this is creating another whole problem which nobody notices and nobody talks about. It is what is happening to natural facilities and nature in Ukraine and other parts of the world. Every time there's a war, there's going to be chaos. Animals are going to die. Trees are going to be felled. Agriculture is going to get stopped. If anybody remembers Agent Orange from Vietnam, when we were trying to kill soldiers there from the other enemies, that killed a lot of people and killed the forest areas too. We cannot live in a world without nature. If there are no bees, there is no pollination. And already since last year and years before, the bees are getting reduced over and over again. And that's impacting the harvesting of many of the lands, right, that we sort of get food from. So we cannot always talk about product and manufacturing, because nothing comes to us without nature. And people have to realize that very strongly, that you can do a war, but to grow back food in those areas, I mean, Chernobyl is a perfect example right now, right? You can't grow anything there. And already people have been there, and a lot of leak has happened in that area. So a lot of challenges. We have to come back into some kind of an understanding of capacity and reset. Everything in the world is capacity. You have capacity, you can grow whatever you want. You have capacity, you can make a business out of money. You have capacity, you can have 50 people running in labor shops. If you have no capacity, in the end, you're only drawn to your personal resources. That means countries in the end may have to rely back on their resources, develop local industries better, and sort of, no, the globalization is not dead. So people who say globalization dead, I argue back, no, it's not dead. Yes, there's a reset happening. New partnership will be formed, new relationships will form, new products will be formed, new processes will come about, new technology will come about. People will survive and find new ways to make money again, right? I mean, stock market in USA is still, Robert, I know you're mentioning about inflation and stuff. The stock market is kind of shrugging it off already. They don't seem to, they seem to have taken everything in stride already. So stock markets in Europe and Asia, they fell, but they seem to have recovered again. So there's a whole sort of a disconnect of business in a way for now, but it will reset, like everything else will reset in the end. And yes, a lot of people will lose lives in Ukraine. A lot of people have to be going back, but many people may never go back to Ukraine anymore. What will happen to those people in Poland, in Czechoslovakia, and Slovakia, and Hungary? That calls for other business problems, right? I'm very passionate, so I speak, without sort of going on, and I can go well and on it. But I'm going to stop here to take some questions on this.
Thank you, Professor. So we're ready for specific questions for Professor Sachdev, and then we will move into the general questions for all of our speakers. Nothing specific? Okay, I will turn it over to Tiger, who will begin our formal Q&A.